again, everyone. Welcome to the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum. This is our monthly Lunch and Learn program, and we're pleased to welcome our Supervisory Museum Curator, William Snyder, as our presenter, and he is going to present on Home as a Foundation. And I am going to turn it over to William. Enjoy, please.
Thank you, Joy, and good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say thank you again to Joy and to Samantha for all the help with the presentation. Today, I would like us all to think about what home might mean as foundation. And just to forewarn you, there may be a few construction metaphors ahead. Well, I'm hoping they get to the level of metaphor and are not just bad puns, but there are lots of folks on the library staff who love puns, so hopefully everybody will enjoy. So, of course, home can symbolize many things to many people. Perhaps such things as roots, or family, or comfort, or perhaps shelter. But can the structure itself in some way provide a symbolic footing for developing characteristics for those who might inhabit it? So, before we dig into building metaphors any further, let's take a quick reminder look at the history of our Eisenhower family and how 201 East South 4th Street, as it was known at the time, came to be. David Eisenhower and Ida Stover met at Lane College in Lecompton, Kansas, and were married there in 1885. The births of their 7 sons are recorded in the family Bible. They first settled in Hope, Kansas, where David opened a general store, and they lived in the apartment above. It was here that their first 2 sons, Arthur and Edgar, were born. The business failed, and David took a job with a railroad company and moved the family to Denison, Texas. And it was here that Ike, who was number 3 in the lineup of children, was born in 1890. Making him the only one of the 7 of David and Ida's boys who was not born in Dickinson County, Kansas. That's David and Ida at the time of their wedding in 1885, a photograph of the birth page in the family Bible, and Ike's birthplace in Denison, Texas, the little white gabled house. David and Ida returned to Kansas and settled in Abilene when Ike was just a toddler, probably before he was 2 years old, when David got a job at the Bell Springs Creamery as a refrigeration engineer. They first lived in a small 3-bedroom home on Southeast 2nd, and it was here that 3 more sons were born, Roy, Paul, and Earl. Paul, who was number 5, died at 9 months from diphtheria. Ike is at the far left in this picture at their home on 2nd Street. An opportunity presented itself a few years later when the family moved for the final time. Father David's brother, Uncle Abraham Lincoln Eisenhower, was moving further west. Ida and David purchased his home in 1898 for the large sum of $1,000, plus the promise that they would take in Grandpa Jacob Eisenhower when he grew older. Ike's younger brother, Milton, born in 1899, was the only one of the boys born in this home. This is a photograph of the boyhood home, but if you'll note, this is the original front porch. This photograph was taken sometime between 1900 and 1908. Now for a bit more on the home itself, which I find a rather fascinating story. The home was built by an Abilene school teacher named Ephraim Ellis. Ellis built the home on Lot 9 at the corner of 4th and what is now Cooney Street, but of course at the time was Chestnut Street, another one of the tree streets. Ellis never got to live in the home. He lost it because he didn't pay his taxes, and the home reverted to the bank. Interestingly, the bank then itself went bankrupt, and Grandpa Jacob bought the home in 1892 and then deeded it to Abraham 2 years later. The property included the home on Lot 9 and all the other numbered lots in the block, which totaled over 2 acres. The unnumbered lots directly to the back of the Boyhood home and facing 3rd Street had a small home that were the Eisenhower's only neighbors on the entire block. Uncle Abraham was a large animal veterinarian and built a barn behind the home for his practice. This line drawing shows the location of the barn and other features that Ida and David moved into with their soon-to-be 6 boys in 1898. Note the location of the well and cistern marked with a W and C just off the northeast corner of the back of the home. And some of the other interesting features are the chicken coop, smokehouse, and privy or outhouse just to the east or right of the barn at the top of the picture. Now, what did a day in the life of Ike and his brothers look like in the home environment? On the left is a family photo taken in 1902, mom and dad and the 6 boys. And as those of you who are familiar with the photograph know, we often get the question, well, who was the daughter? It's not a daughter, that's Milton, probably not quite 3 years old at the time, waiting for his first haircut. And Ike is at the extreme left, just behind his father. And 2 of the boys feeding the chickens on the family property, very near where the museum stands today. So like many of us, the Eisenhower family affected their environment and made many changes to the home over the years. And this is something else I think we need to think about while we're talking today. While most of us might make some home improvements, not many of us these days live in the same home for nearly 50 years. And should that be a factor in considering our concept of home? The first major alteration was in 1900 and was the 1-story addition to the east of the home, the main 2-story block. This addition contained 2 bedrooms, one for mom and dad and one for Jacob. The front porch running the full width of the south facade, we believe, as I mentioned before, was finished in 1908. As part of the bedroom addition, a cellar was also dug under that new addition and a portion of the original home. Guess who got to do that? That's right, the boys. The cellar was used for a fruit cellar, and they installed a coal-burning fireplace. But the boys weren't done digging yet. The original cistern just behind the home, which we mentioned a couple of slides ago, was too small to hold enough rainwater to do laundry for 8 or 9. Just consider that that's how you had to do laundry, was collect rainwater, draw it, and boil it. So a larger cistern was dug, again, by the boys, near the barn. It was lined with brick, and this was used until city water became available. And in 1915, the final major addition that was visible from the outside of the home was added. This was a separate kitchen and pantry and enclosed back porch on the north or rear of the home. So Mom finally got a separate kitchen and dining room when only one son was left at home. And as I was thinking about this, it occurred to me that the same thing happened in my family. When all the other kids were gone, Mom finally got a separate kitchen and dining room. So, however, this does make for a nice large dining room when all the grandchildren come to visit. So what else are the boys doing besides learning construction and building onto the home? Definitely valuable skills to take with them into the future. But in addition to the outdoor chores, tending to the livestock and the garden, helping Mom can all the produce from the garden, or selling any surplus vegetables around town for their pocket money, there are the indoor chores to do too. In a house of all boys, there's cleaning to do, including the laundry, carrying in that water from that cistern again and boiled on the stove, There's sewing to do to help maintain the few clothes, although Mom did most of that, and learning to play the piano, which Mom also taught. All of the boys, but only Arthur and Milton continued to play. Ike gave it up as soon as he could. But Ike loved cooking, so much so that he took over the Sunday dinners for the family and was elected chef on his camping trips with his friends and brothers. Additional interior improvements were made, and yes, by whom? The boys under Dad's direction. In 1908, with the now available city water and sewer, Grandpa Jacob's bedroom was converted into a bathroom. This meant, and I think this is something we should think about, Ike was 18 before he lived in a house with indoor plumbing. So learning how to do plumbing and running water lines is one thing, but the boys also had to hand dig a 6-foot deep sloping trench to the north side of the home to tap into the sewer in the alley right-of-way that ran across the property from east to west. And, following a correspondence course, the boys later wired the home for electricity. So what else might the home have to teach the boys? Well, for all his curmudgeonly ways, Dad provided something of a lead by example. He attended school, of course, and then college, and then continued to self-educate and self-improve through his many different jobs that he had over his lifetime. And he did this through somewhat formal learning, like correspondence courses with technical schools, but also through books and informal learning at home. Very fond of reading, very fond of thorough and critical thinking, and this is something he taught the boys to do. And knowledge is the foundation to self-improvement. So, when preparing this presentation, actually, it occurred to me to do a little digging into some other things. And I've been trying to find, and I still haven't found, a good source yet for how many books the average home had in around 1900. What I did find is that most sources say that today, the average American house has approximately 100 books. Now, granted, we have different technologies, television, audiobooks, Kindles, and so forth. But over 100 years ago, 201 East South 4th Street held nearly 300 books or more. Not bad for what was commonly considered a relatively poor family. I think it's interesting for us to contemplate, particularly when we're talking about a home providing a foundation for future life, that we might struggle to grow our own food. We have to can our own food and prepare it and things of that nature. But knowledge is forever, and it is worth the effort and expense and possible sacrifices needed to obtain it. These are just a few pictures of some of the books that are in the home, and I think it's interesting to note some of the titles. And they range quite widely from all sorts of technical books that range, oh, thank you, Samantha, for the arrow. I think that's rather wonderful. We have thoughts from Marcus Aurelius and thoughts from an African farm, right, rubbing shoulders with Faust. We also have sort of encyclopedias, the Standard Book of Knowledge and the Century Book of Facts. There were any number of medical books and home remedy books because Mom really did do all of the doctoring at home. The family didn't and couldn't afford doctors very much. But then there are also Mom and Dad's books from college, history, mathematics, and lots of those books have interesting little childish squiggles in them that the boys got to do when they could grab a pencil. And then again, as I was talking about with David doing sort of constant learning, we have books on boiler room maintenance and locomotive technology, and that interesting one that's just titled Hawkins' Indicator. That too is about locomotives. But those things are rubbing shoulders with one of the religious texts, a book on the Talmud. And David was something of a self-taught religious scholar and really studied mostly in the Judeo-Christian tradition. There isn't much outside of that, but it does range rather widely. There's the word I want. Sorry about that. Through the Judeo-Christian analysis of religion. So, through books and informal learning at home, again with that teaching of thorough reading and critical thinking and analysis, knowledge is the foundation to self-improvement. So, I think perhaps the biggest hint also comes from, before we leave, I want to, this slide. I just think these are some of our most favorite pictures. I love the whole family gathered on the front porch of the home for a reunion in 1926. That's Ida and David on Ida's favorite glider, which later replaced the front porch swing. This was taken, we believe, shortly before David's death. He passed away in 1942. And then a wonderful picture of General Eisenhower after his boyhood home had been opened to the public for tours in 1947. Okay. And I think perhaps one of the biggest hints about what home as foundation can mean. And don't you just really, even in those pictures, I know they're just pictures, but I can't help feeling Ida's presence in the home. I really think she's still there. And this biggest hint of what home can mean for us and how we look at the Eisenhower family comes from this plaque that is still hanging over Ida's bed and refers to home as shelter. It's nothing more. It doesn't need to be a palace or anything of that nature. So I want us to think about it, and I hope we have plenty of time for questions and talking, but can home be a foundation? So I think it's the shelter that allows the building blocks, the education, the self-improvement, the self-reliance, and perhaps emotion with discipline that gave Ike the foundation for his leadership. Oh, and I also wanted to say thanks to the Eisenhower Foundation for supporting our programs, but couldn't help resist including this photo of Mrs. Eisenhower in 1946 with the first members of the Board of Trustees of the Eisenhower Foundation. So I just think this is a fantastic picture, and I just love it that in just about every picture we have, Ida is always smiling. So no matter the hardship she went through in her life, with David's sort of seriousness, but Ida's emotional support and loving care of the boys, I think that really gave us the foundation. No pun intended. So thanks again. And hopefully we have lots of questions because I know we have some time left.
So thank you, William. If you have a question, you are welcome to put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Or you can raise your hand and I will acknowledge you and you can unmute. In the meantime, I'll say William, we're exploring this idea of leadership. And, when we think about President Eisenhower as a leader, we think of his leadership as a president and then General Eisenhower. But one of the reasons I really wanted to explore this topic is to talk about his leadership as a family man. And so I wanted you to maybe explore that. If you can take a few minutes to maybe talk about how his foundation, as a boy, helped influence how he became as a husband and as a father.
Well, thank you. And I think that's a great question. We have so many examples that I'm sure many of our returning guests hear and have heard in the past. But growing up in that environment of self-reliance with David and Ida, he was really a very natural leader in his sports that he played. He was often, team captain and things of that, which I think really led to developing his own abilities as he worked, further through life. One story that I think may be told fairly often, but I definitely think it bears repeating. Ike led a walkout of student athletes when an African American student from a visiting team wasn't going to be allowed on the field. I think that very early indication of inclusiveness, perhaps we'd call it today, that was a foundation of Ike's character, is really very telling for a teenager in central Kansas, in the early 1900s. I think that's pretty impressive. In terms of later life and growing up in the family that he did, I think with Mamie's help in terms of being so outgoing while Ike was a little bit reserved, in that way it might be slightly parallel to his own parents' relationship. And I think, again, with Mamie's help in terms of family and raising their two sons, of course, poor Icky, who died when he was 3.5 years old, but then John, and John following in his father's footsteps to West Point and so forth. And then, of course, the 4 grandchildren who idolized their grandparents, or so they've told us. I just think having grown up in a equal partnership type family with David and Ida, and carrying that forward into his own relationship with Mamie, very much an equal partnership, and having very similar sorts of traits, it really just perpetuated his own early experiences. And I think he took the best of what he had and moved that forward into his own family, his children and grandchildren.
Okay, thank you. Now, I do want to explore a little bit more about the equal partnership, just because for that time period, or people like to romanticize that time period and talk about, right, what traditional marriage looked like, quote unquote. And usually it's not necessarily an equal partnership. So, I would like to explore that, so as a way to really, kind of look at Eisenhower as that leadership, in that leadership role.
Certainly, and that's a very interesting point. Certainly in his marriage with Mamie, and I find that fascinating. As some of our guests may know, we recently renovated the museum, and we wanted to include quotes throughout, both from Ike and Mamie, so that they could tell their own story. And very, very early on, they're using the term partnership to describe themselves, and they have one career, and they have, now granted, the gender roles might have been what we might consider traditional. However, they're both very strong people. It was definitely a partnership of equals. They definitely worked together to build a better life for themselves, their family, that sort of thing. And yes, maybe manage the home and so on and so forth. But she was also the one who could, sorry, I can only see part of a chat. A chat just came in and I can't see all of it. Or I would answer that too. But again, to get back to Ike and Mamie and their partnership, that's one of the challenges I think we all face in looking at these historic figures that are from a time that's even only slightly different than ours. We have to be careful to look at the lens as best we can through their eyes and not ours looking into their life. So it's that can be a bit of a challenge, but we have to recognize that although we might think of, we have that picture of Mamie as the perfect wife and hostess from their years in the White House, but we have to look back to the previous 40 years of their lives together and really see how it was Mamie's strength that helped to build Ike's career. It was his own talent and so forth. But without Mamie's influence, he would not have been able to achieve what he did.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. I think that's really something.
Did that help, I hope?
You did. Before we get to what's in the chat, I do want to give people the opportunity to comment on your question. I'm sorry, I didn't realize my camera wasn't on. Where you asked, can home be a foundation? You asked everyone to kind of consider that. And so yes, I would like to ask everyone to consider that and maybe weigh in on home as a foundation. How did home help you? How did your childhood or the home you grew up in, how did it help develop you into who you are? Or did it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, did you not necessarily have the opportunities that Ike did even from 100 years ago?
So if anyone wants to unmute.
Oh, interesting. We did get a good question here in the chat, if I might, asking if being something of a middle child with family and limited space might have developed his diplomatic skills. I think that's a wonderful question. Of course, that's something we always talk about when we're giving tours through the home, that the brothers shared bedroom space, for instance, things of that nature. So I think you're probably right that there probably is a certain level of learning how to do give and take with, 6 boys over a 14-year period. It's interesting, though, that most of the boys sort of paired up. And, the first 2 were closer, 3 and 4 were pretty close. Excuse me. And then Roy was a little bit on his own with Paul's death. And then Milton was pretty much friends with all of his brothers. So that was kind of interesting, the way their relationship shook out. But yes, I think, learning to share tight quarters is one thing, but also think about 2.5 acres, lots of chores to do, lots of sports when we can sell enough fruit and veg to buy our own baseball gloves, things of that nature. The family was fairly close and tight-knit, but physically they had space to expand. And I think that outdoor space that they had, whether on their own property or hunting and fishing, or playing sports, I think a lot that helped a lot in terms of relieving some of that tight stress. How many bedrooms upstairs and which boys were in each is the next question. I'm sorry, Lee. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, the dignitaries visit the Eisenhower home very much.
Well, that depends on who you mean by dignitaries, I guess. But not until certainly Ike wasn't perhaps even, I mean, he was up and coming through his military career, but not until later, and certainly not until he rose to national and international prominence in during World War II. So, with his father dying in 1942 and mom dying in 1946, yes, folks did stop by and say hi. And mom was named the first Kansas Mother of the Year in 1945, perhaps not surprisingly. So she was sort of besieged by reporters after that happened, and after the end of World War II in 45. But there wasn't really much of an opportunity then, because with her passing, as I said, in 46 and the home opening as a museum in 47, the family was no longer, shall we say, directly, well, they certainly weren't living there, but not necessarily directly connected to the home any longer either.
I see.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So another question in chat: how many bedrooms upstairs and which boys were in each? There were 3 bedrooms upstairs, 1 closet, no bathroom. So when the bedroom wing was added on the first floor, mom and dad moved downstairs. What had been the primary bedroom, although it was not quite the largest, that was given to Ike and Edgar, I do believe. The younger boys then shared the largest bedroom, which they referred to themselves as the dormitory. And then there's a tiny little bedroom, not much bigger than a small walk-in closet that we might all have in our homes today. Room for a very small twin bed. I don't even think it's fully long. It's a full-length twin bed. And that was Arthur's when they first moved into the home as the eldest. And then as the boys grew older and they moved out, the oldest boy living at home got to move into the private bedroom.
How often did Ike visit home after he went off to World War II and got back to the United States?
Not particularly often. Let's see. I know he visited. He maybe visited shortly after they got married in 1916. And then he visited in 1926 after he graduated from the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. And that's the picture of all the family sitting on the front porch of the home that was taken in 1926,
Sure.
Right after that graduation. And then he was in the Philippines for such a long chunk of time that he didn't have time to come back. And then he was, then we ramped up into World War II. So he didn't get to visit very often. He couldn't come back for his father's funeral or his brother Roy, who died the same year in 1942. He didn't come back for he wasn't able to come back for their funerals. But he certainly came back in 45.
Yeah.
And made his famous speech, and the proudest thing I can claim is that I am from Abilene. So, which we love.
I recently, actually today, I received a book in the mail about Ike and President Hoover. So that was.
They were fairly good friends in later years, and we've got some wonderful pictures of them. They're camping together, and of course Ike is barbecuing because he loved to barbecue. I think those were taken in Colorado when Ike was president during the administration. They're just some great, and here you've got these 2 presidents, right? And they're standing out in the woods barbecuing. And there's some really wonderful pictures.
Here in my room, I have 170 books on Ike. Here in my room.
Just on Ike. Well, well
Just
done
on
you.
Ike.
That's fantastic.
Well, I got all of the books because I met with General Andrew Goodpaster and David Eisenhower in Gettysburg in 1986. And it was General Andrew Goodpaster asked me to go to Abilene and read all I could at the Presidential Library. So I couldn't do that, but I got the 170 books instead.
Well, that's a very, very, very good start.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I'm very impressed. Well done you.
I have a question.
Sure.
How did Mamie, or rather Ida Eisenhower, react to her boys' successes? Because I think they're all pretty successful.
Yes,
was she social? Was she well known? Or I'd like to know more about her.
Ida. That's a whole nother, day long story. I am fascinated by Ida. She's an amazing woman. How far back do you want me to go? She was born in Virginia during the Civil War, was orphaned by the time she was 11, raised by grandparents who wouldn't let her go to school. She left their home, went to work as a maid at another family who would let her go to school, raised enough money to travel west and go to college. Just amazing woman. Now, just another interesting little facet that I don't think we mentioned too terribly often about Ida. At one point in later years, after the boys were grown up and out of the home, she saved enough money, I think, from her, selling eggs to buy a car. She taught herself to drive. David never drove, and she drove by herself from Abilene to Washington, D.C. to visit Ike and Mamie when Ike was stationed there. I think that was in the late 20s, early 30s. I'd have to double check on the exact date. I mean, it was, well before World War II. But yeah, Ida just bought herself a car and taught herself to drive and drove halfway across the country. So absolutely amazing woman. From what I know of her relationship with her sons, I don't know if this is what you were asking. It kind of sounded like it a little bit with her sons' wives. She was certainly very cordial and welcoming, although I think she thought that some of them, I don't know that much about all of them myself, but, certainly Mamie with her more modern ways of, women can drink alcohol, women can smoke cigarettes. Ida didn't particularly care for that sort of thing, but it was okay if Mamie wanted to do it, but Ida didn't have to like it. So, and in terms of her boys and all of them being successful, they all really were. We had banker, electrical engineer, radio and newspaper owner and politician, pharmacist that owned his own company. Milton, of course, was president of 3 different universities and served as senior advisor to several different presidents. And then, of course, there's that brother who was president of the United States. But for Ida, there's that marvelous quote. She was asked by a reporter, and this was, as Lee brought up earlier in his question, following World War II, there was a reporter that asked her if she was proud of that famous son of hers. And she said, of course. Which one? So that was Mom, as I like to think of her, meaning no disrespect, of course. I just think Ida is the most amazing woman. She's, everything she went through in her life and what she was able to do. And as I mentioned, in all the photographs we have of her, she's always smiling. So it's just amazing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I did put in the chat a link to our YouTube page where we have the Getting to Know Ida program that we put on in January of 2022. So Sandra, if you'd like to watch that, if you weren't on it, that gives a little bit more insight into Ida. With about 15 minutes left, William, there is a question in the chat. The home is getting ready to go undergo some historic preservation. And you want to tell us a little bit about what's going to happen?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Yeah, that's we're very excited about this opportunity and that we're able to do this. It is a preservation project. It is not restoration. It's not renovation. These words are sometimes used interchangeably, but they do mean different things when we're talking about historic structures. What is going to be happening is, number one, we're going to preserve and sort of seal up the exterior envelope of the home. So all new roofing, all new guttering systems, all new paint on the exterior of the home. The home will be stripped because, interestingly enough, of course, it was painted with oil-based paint, which is no longer made. So before we can put new historically accurate paint on top, we have to get rid of the old so that the new chemical composition of the new paint can go on. So I want to assure everybody nothing is being changed. We're not altering anything. This is merely an effort to preserve the home for future generations. This is part of our job, right, as stewards of this history. The other things that are being done, we're getting an entire new HVAC system so that the home will be more climate controlled, will be a bit more like the inside of the museum, where at least as close as we can in a structure that's almost 150 years old, we'll try to constantly maintain temperature and humidity. So that's exciting. And will be very good for all those books we just took a look at. So it'll help preserve those for the future as well. And then there'll be some upgrades to the fire suppression system that was installed in the home. So when it's, we're going to have a safety fence around it. There's going to be scaffolding up around it. So we certainly invite you, if you're in town, to stop by and take a look safely from the parking lot, what's going on. It will be interesting to watch. And also, we're going to be posting some information on our website, so keep an eye on that as things progress. But the ultimate goal, I had this an interesting question. Somebody asked me what people are going to see that's going to be new and different when the preservation project is completed. And the answer to that is absolutely nothing. It is our goal to, yes, it's going to look great and crisp and clean and new on the outside in terms of just being polished, shall we say. But there should be absolutely nothing different in appearance when we're finished. That's our goal.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Did that answer your question, I hope? If you can tell, I'm kind of okay. If you can tell, I'm kind of excited about this. It's going to be super cool to be able to do this and, you know, preserve Ida and David's home for future generations. That's part of our job.
We're all excited for it to see how, as a new person to the staff, or newish person to the staff, I'm very excited to see how it turns out. So if we don't have any other questions or comments, we will do some last minute housekeeping, and then we'll end our program. Firstly, thank you to William again for your presentation, for willing to do it, for not telling me no when I asked. Really
You're quite welcome, and thank you for asking.
William?
Yes?
I did have a question in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry, Nicole. I didn't mean to miss it. What's the question?
I had asked if I could try to recreate any elements or atmosphere of his childhood home when he got his own first home of his own in Gettysburg.
First and only home after being gone for how many years? Quick, do the math. 39 years since he left Abilene before he had his own home. Well, as you know, Nicole, he pretty much gave that over to Mamie to do. His was the outside in terms of restoring the farm and the soil, which had been badly degraded through bad farming. He was more interested in the outside of the home. He and Mamie did sort of work together, but he allowed Mamie to do most of that. And I think what's kind of interesting, it's not so much about recreating anything from the Abilene home. And certainly, other than the construction projects, we're not exactly sure what the interior of the home might have looked like when Ike lived here, because of course, Ida continued to redecorate as taste and money allowed. But what I think, and this goes back to the question about Ike and Mamie's partnership too, Mamie always wanted to provide home, and thank you for making the tie-in, Nicole, home wherever they were stationed. And they actually traveled around for years, and Mamie carried 3 wooden sticks that each had, or sorry, 2 wooden sticks that each had 3 paint samples on them. And whenever they got to a new location, she would have the living room painted this color, the dining room, if there was one, painted this color, the bedroom was painted this color. So when Ike came home, he always felt like it was home. The least she could do was change color. And so they continued to do that. And I think some of that shows up in the home in Gettysburg. For instance, although, Ike and Mamie shared the master bedroom, Ike had a little study just off the master bedroom. And it's kind of an Ike green color, or at least in my mind, that color of green is always associated with Ike. And Mamie created that space specifically for him to have a little place to go and rest and get away from things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did I miss any other questions? No? All right. And we'll wrap this up then. All right, as always, special thanks to our sponsors, the Eisenhower Foundation and the Jeffcoat Memorial Foundation, of which our programs would not be possible without their support. We hope that you will join us for our Evenings at Ease program scheduled for April 12th with guest speaker David Eisenhower. He'll talk with us about his grandfather's military career. Keeping in line with our annual theme of the making of a leader, this program will focus on General Eisenhower's growth and rise as a leader, his leadership style, and his legacy. We will be joined by Mr. Alan Packwood, the director of Churchill Archive Center, during next month's Lunch and Learn scheduled for April 28th. Mr. Packwood will discuss the special relationship between Churchill and Eisenhower. He will use documents from the Churchill archives, to show how their mutual admiration was forged by shared experience during the Second World War, before examining the extent to which this bond was tested by different national priorities during the Cold War. And finally, our next book talk is scheduled for May 10th. Al Ortolani will lead a discussion of Gray Eminence, Fox Connor and the Art of Mentorship by Edward Cox, as a continuation of our year-long theme, The Making of a Leader. And of course, our books for our book club can be purchased at our gift shop if you would like, or you can check them out at your local library. So thank you very much for joining us. Again, thank you to William for a wonderful presentation. I would like to thank our communications director, Samantha Kenner. She doesn't always get a lot of notice, but without her, our programs would not happen as smoothly as they happen. And I want her to know that I certainly appreciate her. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great afternoon.